Thanks for tuning into No Wine in No Time. I'm your host Dave, and today we'll be discussing the components of wine. Do you remember when your mother used to say, "Don't judge a book by its cover, it's what's on the inside that matters"? Well, with a bottle of wine, if we know and understand the different components of wine, we'll be in a much better position to look at a label and be able to predict exactly what's inside that bottle. So understanding these 5 components is really the key. And those 5 components are acid, alcohol, sugar, tannin, and water. Now, where specifically the grapes are grown will drastically influence the ratio of one to another in any given wine. So let's look at those components. The first component is acid, and it's the most important component in wine. It provides crispness, balance, and elegance, and overall quality to the wine itself. Now, how does acid get there? Sugar is a very important component of wine grapes, but acid comes when we have large diurnal temperature swings. That's a very fancy word, a meteorological term, but basically it means we have a warm day and a very cool night. So let's say our vineyard during the growing season is 90 degrees in the daytime and 50 degrees at night. That would be a 40-degree diurnal temperature swing. That will create significant acid in the grapes. Now, the magic comes in when the actual winemaker decides when to pick the grapes when the sugar is at its peak levels and before the acid itself fades. So that's component 1. The second component is alcohol. How does alcohol get into wine? Well, it comes through the magic of fermentation. So when grapes are crushed, the grape juice itself has a specific sugar content. We introduce yeast to the fermentation, and the yeast eats up the sugar, so to speak, and converts it to alcohol. So, depending on the sugar level of the grapes to start and how long we run fermentation, we'll be able to predict how either dry or sweet a wine is. One saying that I like to use is high and dry and sweet and low. It's a pretty simple and easy to remember statement, but basically what it's telling us, if we run the fermentation longer, our alcohol content will be higher and our wine will be drier. If we cut off our fermentation earlier, the alcohol content will be lower and the wine itself will be sweeter. So high and dry and sweet and low. Usually what I look for is right around 10%. When we get above 10%, the wine really starts to dry out. Below 10%, the wine really starts to sweeten up. So sugar is the third component that we need to look at. We talked a lot about that in the conversion to alcohol, but sugar is really a reflection of grape ripeness. So that can in turn go back to the area where the grapes were grown. If we think about those areas where the weather is much, much warmer and the growing season much hotter, then the grapes will achieve a much higher sugar content to begin with. If a grape has higher sugar content to begin with, more can be done with it in either heading it towards the dessert side or towards the dry side. And that leads us to our next component, and that is tannins. So tannins are kind of an interesting, I don't want to call them flavor, more of a sensation. Tannins come from grape skins, grape stems, and grape seeds. If you think about other products that have tannins in them, nut skins, banana skins, etc. So when a grape is crushed and the skin is bruised, it imparts tannins into the wine mixture itself. Those tannins provide structure and weight to the wine. So we think about thicker skinned grapes, things like Petit Syrah, things like Mourvedre, things like Cabernet Sauvignon. These are grapes that have very thick skins and impart much higher tannins to the wine. So tannins are important for a couple of reasons. As I mentioned before, they provide structure, but they also provide the ability for a wine to age. A tannin-rich wine is a more age-worthy wine than a lightly tannic wine. So the final component is water. Well, water makes up the majority of grape pulp itself, too much water is a bad thing. Let's think of a grapevine as a straw, and it's sucking up water from the ground around it in order to nourish the berries themselves. If we have too much water or too much rain prior to harvest, those grapevines will suck up that water and it will dilute the flavors of the grapes themselves. So one thing that I say is very, very important is to look at vintage charts. If we got, let's say, rain for 2 weeks prior to harvest time, those berries will be diluted with water, and of course the wine will be a little bit thinner. So those are our 5 components of wine. Understanding them will allow you to look at a wine label and understand kind of what's going to be inside that bottle. Well, that's all the time we have for today, so please tune in next time, and soon you'll know wine in no time.